Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. I've been getting into the concept of the Backrooms lately, and I've specifically been watching the Kane Pixels series in preparation for the upcoming movie, and I really like it. I think it's very effective at what it's trying to do, and it's very well put together, and it really feels like this is a mystery that's actually going somewhere, unlike some other properties I could mention but won't. And a specific aspect of this series that I want to talk about today is the way that Kane Pixels chooses to use his monsters. I'll admit that I don't know a ton about the general internet perception of the Backrooms outside of this series, but I've heard enough to know that monsters in the Backrooms can be a bit of a touchy subject that people have some strong opinions about. You have some people claiming that the popular wiki version of the Backrooms misses the entire point of the concept, while other people think that the wiki is the only Backrooms canon that can exist. And people on all sides of this spectrum can get fairly heated about it. But I think regardless of what your own opinion is, at this point we can agree that Kane Pixels is doing his own unique thing with the series. It's a series that manages to be unsettling and scary in a way that I think can only really work for the Backrooms. And I wanted to take some time to talk about it because I think that the entities that he has in this world are a key part of what makes the series work. Full disclosure, this video is much more of a media analysis than a lore one. At some point in the future, I think I'd like to talk about what I think the monsters literally are in the canon of the Pixel Room verse, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is what they represent and what techniques this series uses to make them effective. I'll be going through each appearance of a monster in the series and why I think it works, both for the specific context of the single video it's in, and for the wider series as a whole. And hopefully we can all come out the other side of this feeling like we've had a very fun discussion. I'll be touching a little bit on wider interpretations of the Backrooms, but this video is primarily focused on the Kane Pixels YouTube series. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend giving it a watch before you get into this video. It's very good, and there are a lot of aspects of it that I'm just not going to have time to touch on in this video specifically, so it's probably a good idea to have the original in mind. Like a lot of analog horror, the experience that the Backrooms builds relies a lot on its presentation and atmosphere, and that just doesn't come across well in an analysis video where I'm assuming you've seen it already. Kane Pixels is a very talented artist with a very bright future, and I think his work deserves to be appreciated by experiencing it firsthand. So if at this point you have any curiosity or interest at all, do yourself a favor and give it a watch. I've included a link to the playlist in my description, and I'll be waiting for you when you get back. With all of that said, I think it's time we get started. Grab some water, get yourself a handful of chocolate-covered almonds, and get comfortable. Let's take a look at what makes monsters so effective in Kane Pixels' Backrooms. Alright, at this point, I have to step back and apologize because I've buried the lead on this a little bit. This is a video about how the monsters in the Backrooms make it effective, but the truth is, a large part of what makes the monsters effective is the fact that they don't actually appear that much. Out of the 22 videos that we have so far, there are only 6 of them where you can say that a monster appears, and honestly, 2 of those probably shouldn't count for reasons we'll get into. At least to me, the monsters of the Backrooms have never felt like the main focus. They always appear as an extra complication to what is already a strange and unnerving situation. The main source of horror in the Backrooms is not its monsters, but instead the environment of the Backrooms itself. So what exactly is the horror of the Backrooms? If the monsters aren't what makes it scary, what is? To understand that, we need to take a look at liminal spaces, and the unease that's often associated with them. There are a lot of different ways that you can describe a liminal space, but the definition that's always stuck with me the most is the idea that this is a place that's in a state that it shouldn't be. Something like a public pool after closing, a childhood candy store with empty shelves, an abandoned shopping mall. These are ostensibly familiar locations, but we're seeing them in a new context that's unnerving. But why? I think people can recognize the feelings that looking at a liminal space gives them, but why exactly do we feel this way about ordinary spaces that are just slightly to the left of what we're used to? I'm sure there are lots of reasons psychologically for why this happens, but I think the biggest one is actually pretty simple. These images are unnerving because we're not supposed to be here. There's this instinctive sense that we were not meant to see these places like this, and the fact that we are seeing them feels almost invasive. People have a certain curiosity towards these abandoned and shut down places. It's part of the reason that urban exploration exists. But with that curiosity comes the notion that this is a place that isn't for us anymore. We're seeing these areas in a way that they were never meant to be seen, and it makes you feel like a trespasser. Kane Pixels is leaning on that subtle, uncomfortable feeling that these images evoke, and the monsters are part of what allows it to become an all-encompassing feeling, rather than being a brief sense of creepiness that leaves you as soon as you go about your day. There is a slight danger with adding a creature into a type of horror that's kind of subtle and nebulous. By choosing to add a monster to the mix, there's the danger that people will think that the monster was what they were scared of all along, and the horror becomes entirely focused on the spooky, scary monster instead of the more hard-to-pin-down aspects that makes liminal horror unique. What I appreciate about the Backrooms is that every inclusion of a monster is careful and well thought out. They're never just thrown in for a cheap scare. They're always an extra complication on top of the fact that you're in a strange place that feels inherently wrong to be in. The monsters are additive to an experience that is already creepy, and they're designed in such a way that they don't take the spotlight away from what is the main focus of the series, and I think that's a very difficult balance to pull off. And I'm going to try at least a little bit to explore how it's done. Just as a small note before we get started, I don't really have a problem with the Backrooms wiki and the stories that it's trying to tell. I think it's not nearly as subtle as it could be, but that's not a bad thing. It's just a different genre than what most people are expecting after seeing the original image. It reads much more like post-apocalyptic survival than the existential dread that people are probably expecting. And I enjoy a lot of what it's doing. I think it's super fun when people create a world-building framework and just go to town inside it. And I think it probably gets a lot more flack than it deserves. I can understand if it's not to your taste, but I don't think there's anything wrong with being a slightly different genre than what inspired you. The wiki is simply a bunch of different stories with different goals than I think a lot of people are expecting, and that's not a sin in and of itself. On that note, let's actually take a look at how these monsters are portrayed in the videos they appear in. I've come to really appreciate the first video in this series, because as the first, it takes on the role of establishing the tone and idea of the series as a whole. And on the surface, it seems like it's establishing a story of a spooky place with a whole bunch of monsters in it. But it's actually a lot more sneaky than that. It almost feels like a bait-and-switch, because it's not until episode 10 that we get another actual glimpse of this monster. You remember how I said that there are 6 out of 22 videos where there's a monster but 2 of them don't really count? Those 2 are places where a monster is implied to maybe be there, but we don't actually see it. It's reminding us of the danger without actually showing it to us. And I think the patience this series has in not using a monster that often is commendable. Instead, what this episode establishes is tension. Tension throughout the whole series. The bare-bones summary of this first video is that someone falls into the Backrooms and then gets killed by a monster. But there's a lot more subtlety in the way that it's presented. We, as the audience, are aware of the presence of a monster from nearly the very start, and the episode becomes tense as we wait for it to reveal itself to our cameraman. And this, essentially, pilot establishes that same tension for the entirety of the series. We know more than Async that there are dangers in the Backrooms, and we know that Async is going to run into them eventually, we just don't know exactly when. This first episode is essentially the first, arc of the series in microcosm, as we sit tensely waiting for this thing to reveal itself. At the same time, this video and the entire series introduces the spooky monster, and then goes out of its way to make you realize that that is not the thing you should actually be worried about. A lot of this video is just a teenager's very realistic reaction to ending up in a scenario that he can't explain. Because we are watching this on YouTube, we as the audience can go frame by frame and tell that there was definitely something there, but our cameraman can dismiss it a little more easily, because the Backrooms does not present itself as immediately dangerous. There is nothing immediately threatening about this place, it's just a bit unsettling. Our cameraman doesn't immediately panic, because yes, this is weird and freaky and we don't know how we got here, but nothing has actually happened to him yet. So any weird feelings he might have are easy to put aside in favor of looking for an exit. One moment in particular that caught my attention is this moment where he finds the writing on the wall, because it feels so incredibly natural.
Okay. What the hell?
I find this moment really impressive from a writing perspective, because we can follow the cameraman's thought process completely without him having to narrate any of what he's doing. Just through his body language and a few words, we can tell exactly what he's thinking and what he's planning to do. Here, he's looking at the arrows, and we hear him inhale a little bit. That's an action that makes it seem like he's processing this, and maybe even calming down a little bit. This is a weird and disorienting situation, but these arrows are a good sign, because this is very clearly an arrow, and that means that other people were here. He sees one, and then a few more, and mutters okay to himself a few times. He's registering what it is and deciding on a course of action. These arrows will probably lead somewhere, hopefully to an exit. This whole thing is starting to feel a little more manageable because we know that others came by, and that means that, theoretically, people can come and go as they please. And then when he finds what the arrows are pointing to, and it's just a bunch of drawings on the wall, he just sounds kind of exasperated. He laughs because, honestly, what else can you do in a situation like this? It's just weird, and sometimes you gotta let the nerves out. And in a way, these weird drawings are still comforting. It's not an exit or people like what he was obviously hoping for, but it's still a continued sign that people were here. This is likely confirming in our cameraman's mind that this is not necessarily a normal situation, but it's happened before to other people, so it's manageable. He doesn't understand what's happening, and he doesn't know where he is, but some weird graffiti is proof that it's all okay. People have been here before, and that's a comforting thought. And then that comfort is completely shattered as things go very, very wrong. The appearance of the monster in this moment is very well done, because we're as caught off guard as the cameraman is. We've put ourselves in his perspective. Even though the audience has more information than he does regarding the danger, we're not expecting anything to pop up when we're focused on trying to read whatever's written here. We have barely a second to read "don't run, stay still" before the thing that it's presumably warning us about is barreling straight at us. And what's really interesting about this is that this is not the end of our cameraman. He is chased, and that's scary, but he actually manages to lose this wire monster fairly easily. And in this way, the monster represents not the ultimate danger of the Backrooms, but an important turning point in how our main character views his situation. Before the monster had made its appearance, you could honestly justify the situation as normal if you tried hard enough. Yeah, it would clearly be a lot of coping, but sometimes you lose your memory if you fall and hit your head. You could probably assume that you just woke up here without remembering how you got there. And if you try hard enough, you'll find that this is just a weird sublevel in a supermarket and it's all going to be fine. But after this monster appears, any notion that this is a normal place that can be escaped through normal means disappears. Through his continued wanderings, our cameraman starts seeing stranger and stranger things. It becomes impossible to deny that this is unnatural, and you are definitely not supposed to be here. The visual design of the monster also helps with this. As I said, I don't really have a problem with the wiki Backrooms and the monsters it designs. I think they're fun and interesting in their own ways. But a lot of them are kind of things that we know as people slightly off. This makes sense with the aesthetic of the Backrooms, but it means that there's always a visual indicator back to reality. You look at a lot of these and you think, oh, that's something I know, but with something wrong with it. That's a smiling, glowing face with no body attached. That's a really big moth. That's the weirdest dog I've ever seen, etc. It makes it feel like there's a connection back to the real world even if you're never going to get there again, which is an aesthetic that very much works with the survival horror elements of the wiki Backrooms. But what I appreciate about the Kane Pixels monster is that there is no easy comparison to real life. This is something that looks totally and completely alien. There are some comparisons you can make, like that it's made of wire or it looks like a mannequin or something, but it's not as easy as that's a messed up person or that's a messed up animal. When you see this for the first time, all you can really think is, what is that thing and I need to get away from it. It's part of what makes this a turning point. There is no way that our main character could look at this thing and assume that it's just a sick animal or a weird person. This is not a person, and it's not anything that exists in real life, and it makes the severity of his situation very clear, while also leaving it extremely confusing and disorienting. What this first episode is actually establishing is a rug pull. With the dangers established, we are now waiting for the moment when Async inevitably realizes that this place they're exploring has dangerous things in it. We as the audience know that they shouldn't be exploring here so brazenly, but they don't know that yet, and that creates tension. And what really reinforces the idea that we don't belong here is the fact that our cameraman did not come here on purpose. This was a complete accident. He was just doing something normal and happened to get really, really unlucky. It gives the sense that in this world, something like this could happen to anyone, and that is deeply unfair and terrifying. These next two videos are the weird ones that I mentioned. The ones where a monster is kind of implied but doesn't actually appear. They don't technically count as encounters or anything like that, but I still wanted to talk about these videos because I think they're important for the pacing of the overall series and what it's trying to do. In informational video, an async employee named Peter is separated from his group and ends up time traveling 2 months into the future. That's not the important bit right now, though. As he's wandering around alone, he enters this weird greenish leaf room that I've started just calling the jungle room in my head. And while he's in there, he hears a very disconcerting sound. Because of the way that these are recorded, this is very garbled and hard to distinguish. And honestly, it would still probably be very hard to discern if we had a better recording, but to me, this sounds almost like breathing or snoring, which is unsettling for a number of reasons. This quote-unquote encounter feels invasive from multiple angles. First of all, it feels like Peter is stumbling into someone's house and overhearing them when he's not supposed to. He's entering a space that he really shouldn't be in, and he knows it because as soon as he hears this, he goes back to the original yellow wallpaper rooms. And from a different perspective, this is also creepy because we eventually find out that these wire monsters will mimic people, which means that if this is one of them, it managed to get close enough to someone to record sounds of them breathing and possibly snoring while asleep, which is a level of creepy that I do not like whatsoever. When it comes to Peter specifically, he's framed as an intruder in this moment, and I think it's probably for the best that he didn't go much further. But what's interesting is that he remains an intruder even when he returns to a place that should be welcoming and safe. Peter eventually finds his way back to the async compound, but he's not recognized as a friend or even an employee. From his perspective, it's only been a tense couple of hours, but from Async's perspective, he's been gone for 2 months, and his proximity to the Backrooms has changed him in some way. He's considered something dangerous, something they don't understand, and while you can see where Async is coming from, it sucks because none of this is Peter's fault, and he didn't do anything wrong. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that makes the ending to his story especially sad. The rest of Peter's storyline isn't something I'll cover in detail, but it's worth noting that the imagery of people accidentally being trapped in the Backrooms as intruders is something that is not exclusive to just Peter. And I'd ask that you pay attention to it as we move forward. Next, we have Motion Detected, which is an entry in the series that is really weird and plays with expectations a lot. The premise of this video is that they're setting up a bunch of motion and sound activated cameras to try and see something. And with this setup, you'd expect that we'd see one of these tripod monsters. You think that this is the moment where they're finally going to realize that there's some monster in here. But that's not what happens. Instead of seeing what is clearly a dangerous monster, we see this. And how are you even supposed to respond to something like this? This is showing us that there's more danger in the Backrooms than just this specific type of monster. I think within the series, we're still not sure what this was. It's completely inexplicable, especially when you were expecting something entirely different. To me, it looks like a floating pair of legs, part of a person's body. But again, what does that even mean? It's just something weird that we haven't gotten an explanation for. And it's showing us that we can't reliably know what to expect, even if we think we can. Async has no reason to believe that there's danger in the Backrooms, and the worst part of this is that this probably isn't considered dangerous. Although the setup of the cameras implies that they're looking for some sort of entity, I think they probably did it because they were looking for Peter, hoping to catch a glimpse of him and send a rescue mission. At this point, Async is not a shady government organization. They're a bunch of scientists, and they care about their employees and colleagues. They were probably hoping that they could help Peter in some way, and that he just accidentally wandered off in a place that's very easy to get lost in. And instead, they found something that they have no hope of explaining. They're still not aware of the potential dangers of the Backrooms, but this is the first time they might get an inkling that there is more going on in this space than they thought. And with that, we finally reach Pitfalls, the first actual appearance of a monster since the start of the series. This is the payoff to the rug pull that we've been waiting for this entire time. And like with the first video, it signals a change in the status quo. A change in the perception that our cameraman, or in this case Async, has about the Backrooms and what they're actually like. In an interview, Kane Pixels talks about Async slowly turning from a relatively normal company into the classic shady government agency that we're used to seeing in these types of stories. And I think that this encounter and situation is what prompted that change, or at the very least, it sped it up. This entry in the series is also important because it's the first time we get confirmation that the monsters are mimicking people. I've talked about this aspect of the world building before, but we honestly didn't realize that that was what was happening until this video came out. Before, it was just warped screaming and strange whooshing noises. Now, there are actual words happening, and it seems like these creatures are mimicking people specifically to lure them. And it makes the body that we saw in Motion Detected feel a lot more sinister. To reference a very good horror podcast, the situation brings to mind imagery of an angler fish. However, even with this luring tactic in play, the breaking and entering imagery still remains in this encounter. This situation arises because Marv accidentally fell into a lower area of the Backrooms. Logically, the best thing that he can do is wait for his coworkers to get him out. No one is forcing him to look for this voice, and it would be a lot safer if he waited for help, but he goes looking for it anyway. And in order to find the voice, he needs to enter into a house in a seemingly residential area. The situation is obviously very weird, but having him enter what is ostensibly someone else's residence is still an intentional choice with that symbolic meaning behind it. As easy as it is to look at Marv's actions and say, wow, that's stupid, he definitely should have known something was wrong, his behavior is another indication that Async does not realize the dangers of this place. It's easy for him to ignore the signs because he's convinced himself that there's a rational explanation for this. And why shouldn't there be? Yes, it should be impossible for people to be down here, but he's hearing a person, so logically there must somehow be a person. That's honestly a more rational conclusion than what actually ends up happening. And just like with found footage number 1, that sense of safety and rationale is completely broken when Marv is forced to face the horror of this place in physical form. Which brings me to a question that I've kind of been dancing around this whole time. How much does Async know about the Backrooms? Or maybe the better question is, did Async make the Backrooms? The original prompt that inspired the Backrooms isn't very specific about where the Backrooms comes from, but there's the implication that the Backrooms are just something that exists. They are there always, and if you're not careful, you might accidentally end up there. But when it comes to Kane Pixel's world, I don't think that it works the same way. I think that in this case, the Backrooms weren't something that was always lurking around, that Async just punched a hole into. I think that Async intentionally made the Backrooms without realizing the possible consequences of trying to create a pocket dimension for infinite storage. I must emphasize that this is my personal interpretation. I don't really have any hard evidence for this idea, and it kind of feels more like a headcanon than an actual theory. But I think it makes sense, and it explains a lot of Async's attitude towards the Backrooms as a whole. Let's just think about this for a second. If I were a scientist who learned about a strange parallel dimension that looked like a warped version of my own reality, would I brazenly walk around with no protection whatsoever? Maybe I'm paranoid, but I think I would probably want to at least bring a weapon of some sort. I would be a lot more careful about where I was and who I was going with. Or at the very least, I would tether myself to my companions in case we lost track of each other. For all that the Backrooms is strange and unknown, Async seems shockingly comfortable with sending people in there until they start losing them. And I think that's because they think they know everything there is to know. Or at the very least, they know enough to think that there's not any danger here. As I just pointed out, the Backrooms as a concept is connected to video games imagery very strongly, so it stands to reason that the Backrooms didn't just pop up with no one influencing it. I think that Async intentionally designed the Backrooms, or at least the first part of it that's near the threshold. One of the first things I thought when we see them open it is that this image slowly coming in looks an awful lot like a video game loading screen. Minecraft specifically comes to mind, but I think it's very evocative of loading screens in general. Async made a pocket dimension to try and have infinite storage, and their exploration is essentially them playtesting it. And if we take this interpretation to be true, their attitude toward the Backrooms makes a lot of sense. Finding this wire monster would essentially be like if you programmed a video games level and then enemies started spawning when you hadn't programmed any. And also this was supposed to be a farming simulator. Although, a better metaphor might be that they built a house from the ground up and then discovered that there was a crawl space they didn't know about. And then after they went through, they found that it led to an entirely different house, and when they opened up the closet, a coat hanger covered in human skin started to chase them down while speaking backwards. We see that in the aftermath of this encounter, the scientists at Async are incredibly surprised and worried that this happened. They were not expecting for anything to be here, let alone some sort of entity that seems hostile. It's possible that the Backrooms always existed, and they just assumed that nothing was in there and punched a hole into it without thinking, but I think the idea that they made this and didn't realize the ramifications until it was too late is a lot more compelling. Thematically, it puts Async in the same position as every unfortunate person that falls into the Backrooms. But unlike those people, they believe that this is a safe place because they created it for a specific purpose. They made it as a benign storage area, but it came out slightly wrong. And now they have to deal with the fact that there might be Cthulhu in their basement. It's an interesting element of this world, and I really hope we get to see it explored more in the future. And I think we will, because that's kind of the point of the story. And I'm very excited about it. If Pitfalls was the video that showed us that the entities are trying to mimic people, found footage number 2 is the video that showed us that the Backrooms themselves are threatening, not just the monsters in them. Because there are several things that happen in this video that imply that the Backrooms as a space have a will and can react to things. It mostly can be explained away as the mechanics of the world, but there's just enough that you start to wonder. The main character in this one is a girl who's experimenting with the Backrooms and essentially gets swallowed when she accidentally exploits a collision glitch. This is once again a total accident. She had no way of knowing that trying to measure how deep this weird hole was would cause her to get transported to a place she has no way of escaping. But the idea that the Backrooms can react to someone messing with them is a little bit disconcerting. This girl is a bit more aware than our first cameraman that this place is weird and bad because of the way that she entered it, but she still reacts in much the same way, because what else are you gonna do in that situation? It takes a while for any sort of creature to actually appear in this one. She only encounters this entity when she unintentionally echoes the breaking and entering theme. Again, this is a weird house in a weird place, but it still feels like she's entering a place that isn't hers, and the house itself feels wrong. We know from the following video that this was home to someone. A house very much like this exists in the real world and housed people who had lives and memories and desires. The counterpart in the Backrooms feels bleak and strange, and like something really bad happened that we don't get to see. I don't think that this house is literally the one from the real world that somehow fell into the Backrooms. I think it's more likely that the Backrooms is expanding in a way that Async wasn't expecting. It's trying to copy reality and not quite getting there. Entering into this home feels wrong, not just because it seems like it's someone else's, but because there's very clearly something wrong with it. The girl in this video asks at some point what all of this is for. This fits with the liminal definition that we've focused on, because this entire place did have a purpose at one point, one that Async assigned to it, but it's all gone wrong, and now it exists in a state where it can never be what it was supposed to be, but it can't move on to become something else either. We're essentially in limbo, and we can feel that we're not supposed to stay here for long. But if you're stuck here, you don't really have a choice. This girl is worried about potentially finding a dead body, but I think what she actually finds is much worse. A dead body would have at least made sense. This does not make sense in any context, and it once again changes the mood of the entire scene. This monster encounter happens pretty late into this episode, and I find its appearance noteworthy because it seems much more relentless than the others we've seen. With our original cameraman, he was able to lose his monster pretty easily, and because there are subtle design differences between the two wire beings that he encounters, I kind of think that he just got unlucky and found a second one after running away. In the case of Marv, he was able to run away fairly easily, and he waited a pretty long time before getting the tether to fully escape. The monster was clearly giving chase, but he had more than enough time to get away. Compared to those monsters, this one is extremely persistent, following her even after she jumps over gaps and tries to escape through a hole in the floor, something that we saw worked in the past but doesn't seem to be effective here. And we don't really know why this monster is so much more aggressive. Maybe it's because she was unlucky enough to enter into its home. Maybe she was just really close and didn't get the head start that the others did. Whatever the reason, it just continues to follow her no matter where she goes. And it definitely would have caught her if she hadn't become occupied with something a lot more inexplicable, which is insane to say about a walking coat rack chasing you, but here we are. The weird thing about this green light is that it also seems to be chasing her. Or maybe it's more accurate to say it follows her. As she's running away from this monster, we can see it a couple of times, and it's weird. I honestly really don't have an explanation for it other than to say that it feels like something specific to the Backrooms location. Something else that implies that this area isn't just static and unchanging. It really feels like the Backrooms is responding in some way to what she's doing. But beyond that, I don't know what this means or why it happened. And I think we'll just have to hope that we get some deeper explanation for it in the future. And now we move on at last to found footage number 3. And oh boy, is this gonna be a beefy section. This is the longest video by far in the series, and it is so packed with stuff that I'm just not gonna be able to touch on everything that happens. I'll be doing my best to bring up what's relevant to the point I'm trying to focus on, but I just want to say that if you watch nothing else from Kane Pixel's Backrooms, I must insist that you watch this video. It is a deeply effective experience, and it got under my skin in a way that nothing else in this series did. And I just need you all to go and experience it so that you can talk in the comments about everything that is this thing. From the very start, this video is doing everything it can to put you on edge. At every moment, we feel like we don't belong here, and it achieves this feeling by making Ravi someone that is intruding, and also someone whose safety is constantly being intruded upon. Before we even enter the Backrooms, it feels like we're already there, because this exploration of the basement is designed to be as uncomfortable and eerie as possible. There are so many layers to make this tiny amount of space feel off-putting and weird. First of all, Ravi has never been in this area before. He's the upstairs tenant in this house, so he's exploring a space that technically already belongs to someone else. On top of that, he asks if someone came to check out the place, implying that a space that belongs to someone else also should have no one in it. And this makes the noises that he's hearing very suspicious. He probably decides to investigate himself because he doesn't want the police to arrive for something that could be nothing, but the feeling of dread is just palpable. And when he gets down there, he finds that the glass door is broken. A space that's already weird now has another unfamiliar element on top of it. We don't get to see what side the broken glass falls on, so it's unclear if someone broke in or broke out, but his decision to start exploring and looking to see if someone is there has you screaming internally the moment he decides to do it. A specific detail that makes this feel like we're already in the Backrooms is Ravi testing the lights. It's a small detail, but it's something that people seem to just do when they end up in the Backrooms by accident. The series actually makes a big point of the fact that it's weird that there's power and working lights in the Backrooms. I'm sure the people who end up there are glad that there's light so they can navigate, but it does raise a lot of questions about how all of this works. Ravi instinctively checking the lights reminds us of those Backrooms moments, and it foreshadows his eventual fall into the same situation. Another way that this basement feels unsettling is the fact that the space is weirdly laid out and hard to keep track of. It might just be me, but this area ends up being much bigger than it has any right to be. When he opens this closet and it's so much bigger on the inside that it audibly echoes, I was convinced that we'd bypassed the no-clip stage and that this was just a door into the Backrooms. The way the camera moves makes it hard to tell where we are and how we're oriented, and he just keeps finding more places to go when it really feels like there shouldn't be anything else. I had to draw myself a little map to figure out how exactly this was all laid out, and it makes sense with this in mind, but it's still so weird. This is about as close to being in the Backrooms as we can get while still being in reality, and it unfortunately makes sense that it's from this uncanny area that we eventually enter the Backrooms for real. And we don't actually see how exactly it happens. At least when the others entered, we got to see what happened. But we have no idea in this case what led to him falling. We're just along for the ride as he falls out of this impossible sloping cupboard into a weird office meeting room. And the fact that he ends up in an office meeting room is uniquely weird. With the yellow-walled Backrooms, they look weird and disconcerting, but they're kind of nondescript. They feel unsettling, but you could kind of see yourself ending up here if you got lost. When it comes to an office building, you're really only supposed to be there if you work there. And even in that case, a workplace can feel weird if you're there at the wrong time. Like, if for some reason you need to visit your office building on a day you're supposed to have off, it feels a little weird. People don't really know how to interact with you, especially if you only know them as co-workers from the workplace. Usually this isn't a big deal because you just grab whatever you forgot and leave, but that's not exactly something you can do in the Backrooms. There's no easy way to relieve the tension of ending up in a place that you're definitely not supposed to be in. Ravi also seems uniquely aware that he's not supposed to be here. The first thing he says once he gets his bearings, as much as he can, is, "For the record, I did not know any of this was here." He doesn't know what's happening, but he knows that he's not supposed to be seeing this. This anxiety about getting in trouble for trespassing is something that he has throughout the whole episode. When he first encounters his monster, he apologizes and says he doesn't want any trouble, because in his mind, him entering this area is what is causing him to be pursued. Ravi is very aware that this place is hostile toward him, because this is the episode where the Backrooms as the true monster goes from an undertone to an overtone. It was sort of implied in found footage number 2, but in this one it becomes much less easy to explain away. I mentioned earlier that we don't see how Ravi enters the Backrooms. With the others, it might have been an accident each time, but we saw how it happened. There was a reason for it. The original cameraman fell and got unlucky, and our camera woman accidentally became a speedrunner and fell through the wall without knowing what she was doing. But Ravi wasn't doing anything. He was standing here. This just happened. Ravi is unlucky just like the others, but in this case, it feels like he was unlucky because he was chosen, not because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And after he enters, the space seems determined to drive him deeper and deeper. Ravi encounters a lot of locked doors, which isn't normal in the Backrooms, and the lights turn off and on by themselves. Maybe my memory is failing me, but I actually think this is the only time that we see a light flicker in the Backrooms. And as I mentioned, the series makes a point of how the lights always work, and it's weird that they always work, so the choice to do this means something. The door locks behind Ravi after he goes through, and the lights turn off and then on by themselves. These events show the audience and Ravi that this is not a normal place far earlier than the others. There's really not a lot of room to assume that there's a logical explanation in this case, and it really makes the tension ratchet up much faster. The Backrooms come across as much more predatory and unwelcome in this video. And in addition, Ravi has to try a lot harder to actually get around. The others could kind of just walk places, but Ravi has to crawl and climb and push things out of the way. These were present elements in the other found footage videos, but they are much more obvious here. This is a place that resembles reality, but it was not made for Ravi or for people, and it's disconcerting that it seems to be pretending that it was. Ravi first encounters his entity in this school-like area. I don't really have proof that it's a school. There's a lot of things that don't look like it, but there's an intercom on the wall, so I'm just gonna call it a school. He enters through an exit door, but it's worth noting that the light is not on for this sign. Once again, weird for an area that's characterized for having working lights. As he walks through this area, we get the impression that something really bad happened here. This is a half-told story that has a lot of sinister implications. Maybe it's just me, but these chairs look an awful lot like a barricade, and a lot of these different items are broken and tossed around like they were dropped in a hurry. But at the same time, in the very next room, these items are arranged in a circle around these white floor markings. It kind of reminds me of the square of tape in found footage number 2, and it makes me wonder what exactly happened here. This is maybe a random passing thought, but I wonder if entering into the Backrooms causes a copy of wherever you were to spawn somewhere else. Obviously, where you entered doesn't look like where you left, but I wonder if this is how the Backrooms gets its information and continues to expand without async's influence. Getting back to the matter at hand, right before the monster makes itself known, Ravi sees something in this corner. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's enough to shock him. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much time to comment on it before he starts hearing sounds, very similar to the ones that he heard in the basement before this all started. And to Ravi's credit, he tries to leave immediately. He only calls out when it sounds like he's being followed, in an attempt to mitigate and pacify whatever is here. Because again, Ravi recognizes that he's really not supposed to be here. Unfortunately, as we'll see in a moment, this attempt doesn't really help him. For this whole video, I've been talking about liminal spaces as areas you're not supposed to be seeing. In other words, these are spaces that just feel a bit off, a bit wrong. The Backrooms monsters are much the same way, because they're trying to be human, but they're just a bit off. Maybe more than a little bit, but the point is that they're not able to actually mimic outside of sound. It's a farce that becomes clear once you actually look at them. Ravi runs from this entity, and it's the same feeling because even though we don't see it, it exhibits some behaviors that might seem human, but if you actually are a human, you can tell just how wrong it is. First and foremost, Ravi doesn't get a response when he calls out to say he's leaving. These monsters can mimic sound, but they can't seem to have a conversation. And even if there was an unfriendly person here, Ravi saying that he's trying to leave and he doesn't want any trouble would probably prompt a response of some sort. And then, when it reaches the door that Ravi closed, it knocks. If you're something that's pretending to be a human, this is an action that makes sense. You knock on closed doors to get people to open them, right? But if you're an actual person, this is super disconcerting and weird. Because why don't you just open the door? If they were an actual person, this is exactly what they would do. What this feels like is another luring tactic. This monster is trying to get Ravi to come back and let it in. But the act of knocking reveals that whatever this is has a fundamental misunderstanding of why humans knock on doors and when it's appropriate to do so. But the fact that it thought to knock at all is even more disconcerting, because that means that it's seen humans knocking and it just doesn't comprehend the purpose behind it. After the monster drops the ruse and starts trying to break the door down, Ravi does his best to get away, and I must once again bring up a connection with lights, because this is where the video blurs lines a little bit. As Ravi is trying to sneak away, he decides to turn off some of the lights, which I personally think is very smart and very warranted. The previously silent monster is making a bunch of warped screaming noises, and then the lights turn back on. And I have to wonder, did the monster turn the lights back on, or was this the Backrooms? When this happens, your mind immediately goes to that earlier scene. This feels like the Backrooms is trying to get Ravi caught, or maybe the monster understands light switches without understanding doors. Either way, this gives the distinct impression that Ravi is being hunted, and he's not very close to getting away yet. But after leaving this area, we do seem to get away, at least for the time being. And then we have a terrifying moment where Ravi climbs a ladder and sees this thing. I don't know how to explain this, but it's absolutely terrifying, and Ravi definitely agrees with me because the video immediately cuts to him hightailing it in a different direction. This doesn't seem to be an entity, but given that we have no idea what it is, it's probably a good idea that we didn't stick around for very long. At some point, we should probably talk about when we actually get to see the monster that's hunting Ravi, because so far he's managed to stay somewhat ahead of it, but this is about to change. Ravi comes to another area with a bizarre cobbled-together radio tower, and like for most of this video, he does the smart thing and tries to call for help. It's entirely possible that this was actually him broadcasting his location to nearby monsters, but I really don't blame him for trying this. It's the logical thing to do if you know how to work with a radio, and it almost seems to work, kind of. It's not really clear what Ravi is hearing, but at some point he seems to make some progress and hear other human voices. At first, while watching, I thought this was a weird call and response thing where he was actually hearing his own voice repeated back to him, but it seems like he's actually picked up on a different radio frequency. There's a brief moment of hope where we think that maybe he can contact someone or learn something, but this disappears when the sounds of the monster return, and we finally get to see it in full. You might notice that this monster looks distinctly more human than it has any right to. And it's extremely terrifying and jarring, because at this point in the series, we know what monsters in the Backrooms look like. We hear this monster make the same sounds the others do, so it's reasonable to assume that it will look the same. But that is not true, and I hate it. By design, we don't see much of this thing, but it should not look nearly this human. The monsters of the Backrooms could mimic voices, but that was it. This suggests either that they're learning, or there's a lot more going on than we initially realized. This monster is different, and the video wants you to realize it's different because it very kindly decides to freeze frame on it so you can tell just how almost human but not quite it actually looks. And the appearance of this monster in particular solidified for me what is actually going on in the Backrooms. The Backrooms are a liminal space, but a liminal space is inherently temporary. It might look weird now, but that empty candy store from your childhood will probably be bought and turned into a car dealership at some point. Still weird, but it's going to change and evolve. The Backrooms are stuck in that feeling of unease, of seeing something in a state it's not meant to remain in. And that's why the creepiness remains constant, because every part of this area makes you feel like you're not supposed to be there. But when you add the monsters into the mix, this idea also shifts and takes on some new implications. Because as we've established, these are monsters that are trying to act like people. Why exactly they do this, we don't know right now. But based on the imitation of voices and this encounter, we can tell that they're trying to appear human. I briefly thought that maybe this was a new type of entity, but I really think that this is another wire monster that's just trying to pass for a person and doing it slightly better in a way that makes it look worse. Going frame by frame, we can see that it does seem to have a wireframe arm under there, which makes me think that this is just a framework that has draped clothes over itself. We see abandoned clothes later in the video, so I don't think it's crazy to say that it's a possibility. These monsters want to appear human, but they don't actually understand what being human means, so they get it wrong. But these aren't a strange, novel thing added to just give the Backrooms some flavor. These monsters show us that the Backrooms is trying to do the same thing. By including these monsters, the series is adding intent to what would otherwise be a static location. The Backrooms isn't just a place that is like the world we know but slightly off. It's a place that's inherently wrong and is doing its best to hide it. I'm not trying to imply that the Backrooms are literally alive within the canon of the series, but these videos go out of their way to treat the Backrooms almost as its own character. The environment is the true horror, with the monsters as a supplement. The Backrooms is a liminal space that is attempting to look normal, but it can't quite manage it because it has no concept of why something is normal. In the same way that this monster knows that you should knock but doesn't know why or when, the Backrooms knows that buildings have sinks in them but has no concept of what a sink is used for, so we end up with this random thing at the end of a hallway for no reason. The Backrooms will often seem relatively normal at the start, but the longer you spend here and the further you get from the entry point, the more you start to realize just how warped and wrong everything is. The Backrooms as a location is the true monster in this version of the story, and this is made exceptionally clear with what ends up happening to Ravi. Because Ravi isn't eventually found by the wire monster. When he gets away, he actually gets away. After this moment of terror, he never sees a monster like this again. He ends up finding a house and hearing what seems to be a real person, and they agree to help him. But instead of Ravi escaping, we hear something much worse. In a cruel echo of what happened at the start of this video, this guy thinks there's an intruder in his home, and when he goes to investigate, he is taken to the backrooms just like Ravi was. Ravi ends this video alone. The battery in his camera is getting low, and the last we see of him is him reminiscing. He's wishing for something normal, thinking about his childhood and what it would mean to go home. It's incredibly bleak and sad, and after how much Ravi went through to survive, it feels awful to have it end like this. It feels like he was so close to going home, but also like there was no way that he could ever go back. This ending highlights another aspect of liminal images and the backrooms that I haven't really touched on, and that's the inherent loneliness of the concept. These pictures often capture things in states we weren't meant to see, and there's often an element of grief to that. Childhood places that we thought we knew eventually become empty. Things you remember rotting away into something unrecognizable. It's scary, and it's sad, and it's captivating. And I don't think this melancholic feeling would be possible if this version of the backroom didn't have its monsters as a contrast. This loneliness is only so potent because we've seen what this place has to offer, and what it offers is a farce. It's trying to be something you knew, and it can never really succeed in a way that matters. And Ravi, along with every unfortunate soul who becomes trapped here, is doomed to slowly wither and rot in the recreated memory of something that doesn't exist anymore. The monsters didn't get to Ravi in the end, but the backrooms still did, and that's what makes this ending hit so hard. And unfortunately, that's all the appearances that I have to talk about today. I understand that it probably feels abrupt to end on a note like that, but this series is unfinished, so I think I just need to attempt to come to some sort of conclusion. The monsters of the backrooms work as well as they do because they're used incredibly carefully and they are very specific to the context of the story being told. This series is unique because it manages to have very scary monster horror while also having incredibly sad existential horror. That's a difficult balance to strike, and I think it's amazing that this series is able to do that. At time of recording, the movie is not out yet, and I don't really know what it's planning to do. There's the possibility that it won't be able to pull off this balance quite as well. I think Kane Pixels, or Kane Parsons, I suppose, is an incredibly talented filmmaker. But he is young and he's never told a story at quite this scale before. But I think no matter what we get, it will probably be the vision that he wants, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that is. And frankly, I have faith that he'll do a good job. Some small part of me really hopes that his plan includes Ravi still being alive. I know that it's super unlikely, and it might take away from the absolute gut punch that is this ending, but he has whiskey and good survival instincts, so he can probably make it, right? Right? Regardless of how everything ends up, I'm really excited for this movie. Maybe it will lean more into just being a monster movie, and maybe it won't. But regardless, I really want to see what happens. And I hope all of you will stick around to see me talk about it in the future. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm sorry if this video feels a little bit jumbled. I was having a bit of trouble writing the script, and I basically cranked this thing out in 2 days, so forgive me if it's a little rough. If if you want to hear me talk more about the Backrooms and other cool stuff, be sure to subscribe. And you can also join me for the after party that I'll be having on Twitch. These streams are mostly just me chilling and playing some games, and I'd love for you to come say hi and ask any questions you might have. And if you'd like to go the extra mile with your support, I have a Patreon where you can support me and get all sorts of exclusive rewards for it. And I'd like to take this moment to thank my patrons, including but not limited to Perplexia Sphinx, Snick, Tree, Lurch18489, Sphinx, I May Be Dumb, and Puppet Wraith. Thank you all very much for your continued support. I super appreciate it, and it really does help me keep the lights on and keep making these things. And thank you to all of you for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!